Hello everyone. So today I'm going to show you guys how to make a pillow. I'm actually going to show you how to do 3 pillows, but it's going to be 3 separate videos. They're going to be progressively more difficult to make. So this one today is going to be the easiest one. Where I'm going to be using some of my quilt panels that I make, or my fabric panels that I make out of my art. And so I wanted to show you, first off, if you're going to order fabric panels. So like you can see back here, these are large fabric panels, so you can get big ones on my website for making quilts and things like that. And then you'll notice down here that these are a lot smaller, and these are more conducive to making to making pillows because they're not quite as big. You can still make pillows out of the larger panels, but they will be very big pillows, just so you know. So when you get on my website, if you want to order some of my panels, you're going to want to look at the sizing because they're all different sizes. So I'm going to show you how I make pillows, 3 different kinds of pillows, like I said. But first I'm going to show you, I got to move a couple things and I'll show you what we have. Alright, so the first thing I did was obviously pick out my panels, and then I took my fabric and I decided what colors I was going to use for each one. So the irises, I went with a yellow. I'm going to put the yellow as a border and then the purple as a border. And then we have, and I'll show you why this is in the packaging still. So this is a fireweed and bee, and I went with a gray for the first border, and then kind of a cute little woodsy theme for the outside of the pillow. And then I have, this is one of my new panels, and this is a sea turtle, and so for this one I have kind of an orange to match with the orange, but then a blue that kind of, I guess, reminds me of water. Anyway, so move those out of the way. Alright, so when you order panels from me, they come packaged like this. They're in a plastic packaging. And so I just wanted to show you, because I usually start with this already pre-cut, but it's just kind of on a paper backing. And so you're going to want to pull it off the paper backing, pull it out of the packaging, and then you have to take it and press it. And you're going to need to use a little bit of water to spritz it, but you'll be able to get the fold marks out of it. So I'm going to go and press this flat, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I spritzed that, hold on, let me get you a little closer. I spritzed that with water, and as you can see, and then pressed it. It's flat, looks good. So I always put a border on the fabric that I do, simply so I have room to cut. I didn't want to, I don't want to put my one picture next to the other, because it's printed on fabric. It's not going to be square. So I want to have enough, and even on this one you can kind of see this is a little wavy a little bit. Anyway, so you need enough to cut off excess. Some people like to use these borders around them. I don't. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to cut it so that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the inside of this gray line, so that all that's left when it's sewn together as a pillow is just the body of the picture. And you can do it however you want. If you would prefer to have some of that border showing, you can do that too. So I'm going to line this up and make sure the 1/4 inch on my ruler is inside the body of the picture, and then I'm going to cut. So that's how I prepped my square. So the next thing I'm going to do, I decided that for this pillow I want the gray border, and then I want this wildlife border. So I'm going to I haven't decided if I want it that narrow. Actually, I probably do. So this is just some scrap that I had. It's 1.5 inches, so it would make up like a little shy of 1 inch border. So I'm going to cut enough of this to go around this pillow, and then I will come back and show you how to sew that on. Okay, so I just pulled this out of my scrap pile, and you can tell that it is a scrap of fabric. So I'm hoping, let's see, yeah, so I'll have enough to go straight down. So I already have one longer piece, so I need 3 more. I'm just going to first line that up on a grid line on my cutting mat with my long ruler, and then cut that to get that straight line. And then I'm going to come over 1.5 inches. And this is doubled, so I'm actually just going to cut twice. Okay, so we have all our pieces for this first border. So what I'm going to do is actually I probably won't even need all the pieces. Take these right side together, and I'm looking, it doesn't have a up or down per se. So I'm going to put one here and one here, and then I'm going to go sew those 2, and then I will cut off the excess when I'm done sewing this first layer. Okay, so I'm here at this sewing machine, and as you saw before, I left a little overhang, and I'm still going to leave that overhang. I'm just going to line up the edges because I want to be able to cut it square, so don't cut that off yet. And I'm sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, we're at the ironing board, and so I'm going to push or press these out. So I'm keeping all the seam so it's going out away from the center. And I'm first going to start with just kind of gently pressing it back. Make sure everything's evenly pressed back, and then push and push out. Okay, back here at the cutting board. Cutting board, is that the right term? Cutting mat. Okay, I'm going to square up with one of these seam lines, and I'm going to pick this one on the bottom because it's the easiest one to see. And I'm going to make sure this line goes straight across here. And this at the end sometimes will kick out a little bit, so I'm going to make sure it's straight the majority of the way and as close to this edge that I've already cut as possible. Somewhere in there. And always hold on to it because sometimes it doesn't cut all the way through. And for some reason today I cannot cut straight. I cut out fabric earlier and could not cut straight. And I'm just going to check because this one edge looks a little bit funny. Yep, it sticks out a little bit on the bottom here. You want to keep these things really, really square because if it stays square, it's really easy to finish off. Okay, now I'm going to take my other pieces of gray. Same thing, I'm going to put one on one side, one on the other side, and then I'm going to go sew those down. Okay, so I'm going to match up my edges, but again, I want that excess to go a little bit over on the top, or on one end and the other end. We are working on the top and bottom. And again, a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so we got our top and bottom, and we're going to do the same thing here. Just kind of starting off slow. Just get that kind of pushed back and then press it all out. Okay, so we have our piece. Now this time we're going to square up the whole piece because we want these borders to all be the same width. And when you sew them, sometimes they'll pull and sometimes they're not quite as square and whatnot. So we're going to square the whole thing up. But first we're going to square up the side where we need to cut off the excess. And we're going to square along the seam line here, not along this edge, because we want to cut off just a little tiny bit of this little border piece anyway. Just not that you have to. If it's square all the way down, great. But if it's not, then you're going to want to cut off a little bit. So there's my 1 inch, but I want my border to be just under 1 inch. So it looks like I'm not going to be quite at 1 1/4, but we're going to be close here. And so I want to just make sure that's very, very straight. Okay, so that stage is square, which is what we want. Okay, so we're done with this gray fabric. Set that aside. Now I'm going to go press this fun little, I don't know, outdoorsy fabric, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I got this pressed. One thing to remember is when you are quilting, it's best to press your fabric because if you don't press it, oftentimes it'll get a funky little fold in it somewhere. Like when you're cutting, it'll be on the underside, you won't see it, and then it cuts really weird. So at least if you're not going to press it every time or all of it, check it out before you cut it. Because sometimes you can mess up a lot of fabric cutting it weird. So, okay, you'll see with this one, this is a fat quarter. And this has an up and down pattern, if you can see that. And so I want to, you know, when I put it on my little bunny, or sorry, bee, I'm seeing these bunnies saying bee. I want to make sure that it looks all right. So when you have your fabric, make sure you're going the direction you want to go. So these ones, you know, all of these are one direction one way and then the opposite direction the other way. So I haven't decided. I think it'll be all right, however I cut it. But anyway, so for this one, I want to do a 3-inch strip. So it's going to be 2.5 inches when I'm done. So this is a selvage edge here. So I'm going to fold it in half down that selvage edge. And then just smooth it up. If the selvage is straight, I'm not going to worry. See how that's not lined up? I'm not going to worry about that because the selvage is straight and now we have a straight edge here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is line this up on my cutting mat and make sure this first cut is just to square everything up. And I'm lining the fold up. And make sure I'm overhanging enough that I'm going to cut off any crooked edges. So cut that off. Okay, now I'm going to do a 3-inch. Actually, you know what? I might do 3.5, so it's a finished edge of 3 inches. I'm going to need 4 strips because I'm not going to worry about the pattern. I think because it goes up and down and everything, it's fine. 1, 2, 3. Make sure you're cutting on the right spot. So there's 2. 3. I don't know about you guys, but like you'll see me like lay down my fingers, making sure I have 3 and then a little bit, because I have cut them wrong before. 4. Okay. So now I'm going to do the same thing. So I always do long edges first, then short edges. So I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to look at that. The bunnies are going to kind of end up on the side anyway. Doesn't really look like it matters which way I go. So I'm going to go this one and this one, and then we'll press. Okay, so I am going to line up my edges like I've done before. I'm actually going to come down a little ways because I think there's enough extra that I could use it for something else. So again, 1/4 inch seam allowances. Alright, so we have this piece side sewn on, and I'm just going to press this out. Okay, now we're going to do like we did before on the other, on this gray border. We're going to go along, and again I'm going to go along this seam. I'm doing the long seams. You want to do the same one every time so that it stays square. And you can even do this seam if you want, but I'm going to go with the long edge. I feel like I'm somewhat straight in my sewing. Okay, the last piece we need for our pillow top. We're going to take these and we're going to sew them on to the top and bottom. So we'll go get that done. All right. So now, just like before, we're just going to leave, a little bit of excess at the top. This technique requires not a ton of precise cutting because you square everything up on every step, which I have to do whether I precisely cut or not, so I don't know about you all. Okay, so now we're going to press this one out. Okay, so this is the final time we're going to square the top up. And we're going to do the same thing that we did before. So we're going to follow this edge. We're going to square it, but we're going to use the grid on the cutting mat to make sure everything's perfectly square because this is our last step for the top. to do is to measure this, the sides. So here's my one. Let's see if you guys see that. So it's 15 1/4 by 17 1/4. So I need to cut my back to be that size. Now I've debated because I have this funky little piece of fabric here, but it wouldn't be big enough to do the whole back. I'd have to sew them together, but that might work too. All right, so I thought I had something else I wanted to use, but I decided I did not. So what I'm going to do is sew this back together so that it's the same fabric. So I'm lining it up here. I need like a 16-inch. I'm going to first do it big and then cut it down to the same size. So I'm going to do a 16-inch, and then it's long enough, it'll make it about 20. Well, let me see, hold on. Yeah. Got a little nervous there for a second. Okay, now I'm going to sew these selvages together and press that, and then I'll be back. Okay, so as you can see, I've got my, so let me show you what I did. I took just 2 pieces and I just sewed them together, and it was on a selvage, so I did a 1/2-inch seam allowance and to get the selvage inside the seam allowance so it's not in the body of the quilt, or the pillow, sorry. And then I pressed it all flat so that it doesn't, if you fold it over to one side, especially the selvage, it can seem kind of thick. So I have my piece of fabric, and as you can see, it fits. It's the right size for my pillow. So I just need to cut it to the correct size now. And we had 15 1/4. Actually, you know what I might do? Just turn this over. And this edge right here I know is straight. So I can put my pillow right there. And cut down my edges. Then if I wiggle, it's all the same size, one way or the other. Just kidding. That's not why you do it, but it will make it easier to put it together. So there's one edge. I'm actually going to pin, because we're going to sew this together next. So I'm going to pin this in a couple spots just to hold it so it doesn't move. And there we have it, the backing and the front all the same size. Okay, so this is the easiest pillow in that we are going to sew this together like this and leave a hole for stuffing. So that's one thing I forgot to tell you at the very beginning. You're going to need stuffing for your pillow, for this pillow. This one does not go on a pillow form, it just gets stuffed. So I'm going to leave the bottom open. So what I like to do, because sometimes I forget that I sew it completely shut, and then I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? I like to put like a double pin, and actually I don't need that much space. So we'll put one here, one here. Depends on how much you want to hand sew, but I don't like hand sewing so much. Okay, so we're going to take this over and we're going to sew all the way around and stop here so that we have this opening that we can pull the pillow right side out. And because I put the backing face side up and then my pillow front face side down, we're already set up. Whoops. Okay, so that's one thing I should specify too. So you want your right sides together. So this is the wrong side. It's got my seam. This is the wrong side. It's got all the sewing seams in it for the front and back. So the right sides are together. So when we flip it over, it's going to be right side out. Oop, I pulled my needles. Okay, so remember I'm going to go around, but I want to start at one of these purple pins and stop at the other. And I'm going to still do my 1/4 inch seam allowance, same as before. And it doesn't matter where you start and stop per se, but you just want to remember start and stop. The other thing I do on this now is I am going to back stitch because I want this to be fairly sturdy. Okay. Now at the corners you can decide what you want to do. You can round the corners. I'm just going to square them, so I'm going to go about 1/4 inch away. You may need to check a couple times, so that wasn't quite far enough. I'm just going to go one more stitch forward, and that's just about perfect. It's a little And now this is my last side. And again, I want to stop about where this purple pin is. Actually, I'm just going to pull that out and keep my finger there. And then I want to go back and forward. So, clipping my threads. And as you can see now, I have an opening for pulling my quilt right side out. Or not quilt, sorry, pillow. All right, so we've sewn this all the way around. So pull out all your pins if you left them in. Yeah, ow. Ooh. Now one thing you're going to want to do is, if you did square, well, square or round, you're going to want to cut very close to the edge, to your stitching line. So this one, make sure it's not the one I went over, and I'm going to snip off this corner, and then I like to go back in and snip and snip so that it is almost rounded even though it's a square corner. One thing that I find helpful for turning, and I'm not going to use this to actually turn it, but I'm going to use it to push the corners out. So from here, you're going to take your opening, and I like to start on a corner, push that corner out. Strain on that area. Okay, now I take my knitting needle, or I have used a pen, but the pen sometimes will push through. And if you come right to the corner, you see it gives me that perfect corner. Okay, now we're going to go press this flat again. Alright, so this pressing takes a little bit of extra effort. So if I were to just press it, in some places it would be crinkled and the seam would be inside and it wouldn't look good, and then when you stuffed it, it would look weird. So I like to lick my fingers and roll the fabric, and it'll roll that seam out where I want it to be. And you just want to take your time and just press a little bit. And you can do it even on the board. this edge is where our opening is. I'm going to start by working the same thing we've been doing from here to the opening. And then I'm going to do this side from here to the opening. And then I want to press this one as close as I can to what it should be. I don't want it pooching out at all. And that'll require, you know, rolling it and checking it and rolling it and checking it. So this way, when I go to stitch it up, I know where I should be stitching. Okay. Okay, one thing I did before I got done pressing, as I moved my camera and walked away, was I remembered that this had been wrinkled as we're switching it from wrong side to right side, turning it right side out. So I did go back and press the panel itself. Okay, the last thing, not last thing, second to last thing we need to do is stuff it. So we have our little opening here, and you're just going to want to get just some stuffing. You can buy this at the fabric store or whatever. And we're going to stuff our pillow. This isn't enough. I'm going to need more. I have several bags of this. Anyway, so we're just going to stuff the pillow. And it depends on how fluffy you want it. Okay, I'm going to call that pretty good. Make sure I have stuffing in the corners. And we're going to stitch up this end. That's our last step. So the last thing we have to do is stitch up our hole. So you're going to need a needle and thread, obviously, and you're going to want to tie the end. And then I like to start and go from right to left. You can go whichever direction you want. And the first thing I do is come from the bottom and put my needle in, right next to where I ended with my sewing machine. I'm going to just kind of whip stitch it closed. Now this one, I guess I can't put that in my mouth and talk to you. This one, the pressing kind of went away, but I can kind of still see where it was, and then this one stayed pretty good. So I'm going to just hold these closed, making sure I have enough. And then I'm going to catch just on the outside, a little bit from this side. Make sure it doesn't get in a knot. A little bit on this side. A little bit on this side. I don't know if you can see that, but a little bit on this side. And just go back and forth. just slightly past that, just to make sure I'm far enough. Now I'm going to pull up, just to kind of, sorry, I put that back in my mouth. Pull it to kind of relax that, and then as you see, you can't really tell. So to finish it off, I'm going to stitch through the backing, just right at the seam line. Pull it almost all the way through, run my thread through the loop. And this is going to tie a knot. I'm going to do that 3 times. There will be a little pooch there, little tiny. And then what I'm going to do is take the needle, put it through there, and then out into the body of the pillow, pull it through, don't pull it too tight. And then I'm going to snip that off. And then that hides the extra thread. Actually, I'm going to snip this other piece of thread off from the sewing machine. And there we have it. I need to still kind of work the, work the batting, but there's our first pillow done. And you can straighten your batting out a little bit better as you go along if you want. But anyway, that's our first pillow. It's a simple pillow. It's got a matching back, the front, couple borders, and a panel. And like I said, if you want to see these panels, they are on my website, StephanieRitchieArt.com. And if you like this video, you can subscribe and hit the bell, and you will get notified when I do the next pillow. The next pillow will have a different kind of back. It will have a back that you can put over a pillow form, and I'll show you how to make an easy pillow form, and then we'll make the pillow for the next one. So I hope to see you then.